The auction block felt like ice beneath her bare feet, even in the sweltering August midday heat. Clara May wrapped her thin arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the sickening realization that she had become property, a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. Her father's gambling debts had finally caught up with him, and she was the price he had to pay. How much for this beautiful young woman? The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty town square. Strong back, good for kitchen work, sewing, and anything else a man might need. Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd of men gathered like vultures. Clara kept her eyes fixed on a spot on the ground, trying to disappear into herself. She heard whispers about what happened to women sold at such auctions. The lucky ones became housekeepers, and the unlucky ones. She shivered and tried not to think about it. $50, shouted Jake Morrison, the saloon owner, whose hands had wandered too freely when Clara had served him a drink to pay her father's debt. 75, shouted another voice that Clara recognized as belonging to old Pete, whose wife had died last winter, and who had been making inappropriate comments about needing company ever since. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. Any choice would be a nightmare. She closed her eyes and prayed for a miracle, even though she had long since stopped believing in miracles. $100. The voice was soft, almost gentle, cutting through the noisy bidding like a warm breeze. Clara opened her eyes wide and searched for him among the faces until she found him, a tall, thin man standing apart from the others. His face was almost completely hidden by a worn hat, but she could make out his kind brown eyes and tightly pressed lips. He was dressed simply, in clean but worn clothes, his hands hanging calmly at his sides. 100? 2? The auctioneer looked around hopefully for other buyers, but the crowd fell silent, staring at the stranger who had easily outbid everyone. Sold to the gentleman at the back of the hall. Clara almost fell when she realized that she now belonged to a complete stranger. When the crowd dispersed, muttering their disappointment, the quiet man approached the platform. Up close, she saw the wrinkles around his eyes and the calluses on his hands, signs of honest labor. "Madam," he said simply, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was hoarse, but gentle. "My name is Thomas Brennan. I have a horse and carriage waiting. Are you ready to go?" She nodded silently, not trusting her voice. He carefully helped her down from the platform, as if she were made of glass, not a piece of property he had just purchased. The ride to his ranch was tense and silent. Clara glanced furtively at Thomas, trying to gauge his intentions, but his tanned face gave nothing away. Golden waves of grass rushed by outside the window, interrupted by distant mountains that appeared purple in the rays of the setting sun. It was beautiful, but Clara was too frightened to appreciate it. When they finally stopped in front of a modest ranch, surrounded by corrals and farm buildings, Thomas slowed down and turned to her. "I think you're wondering what I expect of you," he said quietly. Clara's throat went dry. "Yes, sir." "Well, first of all, there's no need to call me sir. Thomas will do just fine." He climbed down from the wagon and came over to help her out. "Second, I want you to know that you're safe here. I didn't buy you to hurt you or use you in any way. I bought you because no woman deserves to be sold like cattle. And I thought I could give you a better life than those other men." Clara stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "I don't understand." Thomas took off his hat and ran his hand through his graying hair. "My wife Sarah died 3 years ago. Since then, the house has been very quiet, and I need help with cooking and other chores. But I'm offering you a job, not slavery. You'll have your own room, a fair wage, and if you ever want to leave, you're free to go. I'll even help you get wherever you want to go." The tears she had been holding back all day finally broke free. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." "Maybe that's why," Thomas replied simply. Everyone deserves a chance at a decent life, Miss Clara May Hartwell. Well, Miss Clara, would you like to see your room? The house was simple but clean, with handmade furniture and windows that let in the golden daylight. Thomas showed her a small bedroom with a real bed, clean sheets, and even a wash basin with clean water. "I'll leave you to settle in," he said. "Dinner is usually at 6 if you're hungry. And Clara?" He paused in the doorway. "You owe me nothing more than what any honest employer deserves from an employee. We'll figure out the rest as we go along." That first evening, Clara sat at Thomas's kitchen table. Actually sat, not waiting on others, and ate her first truly substantial meal in months. Thomas was a man of few words, but his silence was comforting rather than threatening. When she offered to clear the table, he simply nodded his thanks and went out to check on the horses. Days turned into weeks, and Clara began to believe that Thomas Brennan was exactly who he seemed to be, a good man who had saved her from a terrible fate and asked for nothing in return but honest labor. She cooked, cleaned, mended his clothes, and gradually began to feel like a human being again, not a burden or a piece of property. Thomas never insisted on conversation, but little by little she began to share bits and pieces of her story with him, about how her mother died when she was 12, about how her father, to forget his grief, took to gambling and drinking, leaving Clara to fend for herself, about how she worked every job she could find to feed her sister while he squandered every penny. "It seems like you've spent a long time taking care of everyone but yourself," Thomas remarked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold. "Maybe that's what all women do," Clara replied quietly. "Some women, maybe, but everyone needs someone to take care of them sometimes." It was the most personal thing he had ever said, and Clara found herself studying his profile in the fading light. There was something lonely about Thomas Brennan, something that resonated in her own heart. As autumn arrived, Clara realized she was happier than she had been in years. She had a meaningful job, a safe place to sleep, and for the first time in her life, she felt valuable rather than a burden. Thomas paid her fairly and treated her with consistent respect and kindness. But more than that, she had fallen in love with him. It happened gradually, like the changing of the seasons. She looked forward to their quiet conversations over dinner, the sound of his boots on the porch when he came home from work with the cattle. She noticed how he always made sure she had enough firewood, how he brought her a warm coat when it got cold, how gently he treated her hands when she cut them on a broken bottle. This realization terrified her. What if he found out? What if he thought she was trying to manipulate him to secure her position with feminine wiles? What if he sent her away? Winter deepened, and Clara kept her feelings a secret treasure. But Thomas was an observant man, and she sometimes caught his gaze, unable to discern its true meaning. The truth came out on a snowy February evening as Clara was mending one of his shirts by lamplight. Thomas sat opposite her, repairing a bridle, and the silence was comfortable, as always. "Clara," he said suddenly, without looking up from his work. "Yes? You know you don't have to stay here." Her hands froze on the fabric. "I know. You have enough savings now to go anywhere you want. Start a new life where no one knows your history." The words hit her like a physical blow. Did he want to get rid of her? Had she done something wrong? "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, whispering so softly she could barely hear herself. Thomas finally looked up, and she was surprised to see something like pain in his brown eyes. "It doesn't matter what I want. You're young, Clara. You're beautiful, kind, and smart. You can choose any life you want. Don't waste it taking care of an old cowboy who's stuck in his ways." "You're not old," she replied automatically, then blushed at how it sounded. The corner of his mouth lifted in a slight smile. "I'm at least 15 years older than you. old enough to know that you shouldn't fall in love with a woman who's only staying out of a sense of duty." Clara's heart stopped, then beat twice as fast. "Thomas? I know it's unfair of me to feel this way," he continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "You came here because you had no choice. The last thing you need is pressure from the person who is supposed to protect you. So if you want to leave, I'll help you. And if you want to stay, I'll do everything I can to hide my feelings." Clara put down the darning and approached him, her hands trembling. When she placed her hands on his face, he looked at her with such vulnerability that she caught her breath. "Thomas Brennan," she said quietly, "you saved my life, but not just at that auction. You saved me from believing that I was worthless. You showed me what it means to be surrounded by kindness and respect. You gave me back my dignity and hope. How can I not love you for that?" His eyes searched her face. "Clara, you don't have to." "I don't have to do anything," she interrupted him. "You gave me a choice, and I choose you. Not because I'm grateful, not because I have to, but because you're the best man I've ever known. Because when I think about my future, I can't imagine it without you." When Thomas kissed her, it was the tender kiss of a man who had been given a miracle he never dared to dream of. And when Clara returned his kiss, it was the passionate joy of a woman who had finally found her home. They were married that spring, when the prairies were covered with wildflowers and the cattle grazed on fresh grass. Clara wore Sarah's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and Thomas's hands trembled as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Are you sure?" he whispered as they stood before the minister. "I've never been so sure in my life," she whispered back, and she meant it. Thomas had bought her freedom, but she was giving him her heart of her own free will, and that changed everything.